We did something today in our readings that I don't know if a lot of you caught that I happen to have enjoyed. We read the entirety of one of the epistles of Paul, that is Philemon. We read the whole thing. In ancient times, that would have been what it would have looked like to get into the Word. It wouldn't have had a lot of this sermon talk. It would have been a lot of just reading what Paul wrote. And in Philemon, which is the book named after a friend of Paul's who was a slave owner, is a directive that Paul gave to the slave, his name was Onesimus, to go back and be a slave. And this book has been used through history in many different and wrong ways. The essence of the book is that there is a cross to bear to be a Christian. And for Onesimus, it was to go back and be a slave. By going back and subjecting himself, submitting himself to this man, Philemon, that was how the message of God was going to be brought to Philemon and everybody who lived around there. And from what we can gather, it looked like Onesimus ran away from wherever he was and found Paul in Rome in a prison, and Paul sent him back. So when you're sitting there and your cable goes out and you're watching the football game and you're burning your internet data and you think, man, this is just my cross to bear, I'm going to have to be okay with it. That is not a cross. When your pillow expires and you have to get a new pillow, yeah, pillows expire. Did you know that? I had to look that up. Yeah, that's not a cross. Oh, I had to sleep on an expired pillow. It's not a cross. When the traffic is just horrible, and you can't get across the Buckman, and you're thinking, maybe I can swim faster. That's not a cross. To be a disciple is to bear a cross. It's to truly 100% fully follow Jesus, and that takes effort. That takes sacrifice, real sacrifice. And some of the things that we go through in life, those aren't sacrifices. They're just pains. They're just problems. They're just troubles. They're not sacrifices. What happens is when we sacrifice for Jesus, when we put His needs, His wills, His desires first, and then that causes trouble and problems in our life, that's a cross. Doing that is what it means to be a disciple. To be a disciple, then, gives you meaning. You know, the meaning of life. Everybody's searching for the meaning of life. What's the meaning of life? Because see, if you have the meaning of life, if you have a meaning to your life, then no matter what you're going through, you know why you're going through it. And it makes not only that going through easier, it makes it valuable. It gives reason to go through and do those things because you know what the end is. And so if you have meaning in your life, then all of a sudden not only is life easier to bear, it's enjoyable, which is what happens when you get the meaning of life. The first is you have happiness. You're satisfied is what I would like to say, that you have this satisfaction in your life. The other thing is that you have personal growth because you know what the next step is. You know what it is to get to the next place. So you're not just doing that rat race anymore. You're actually getting somewhere. And finally, the meaning of life, being a disciple, is to have belonging, to be part of a community, to know your place in the world. Now think about those three things. Satisfaction in your life, personal growth, and belonging. If you had those three things in your life, I believe that you would say that your life was complete. I think most people in the world are looking for those things. But what we end up doing instead is we end up chasing things that we think we want. We end up chasing all of the things in this world that we think we want, and we think that we can chase life down, and we can't. We try to garner possessions. And when I say possessions, I don't just mean luxuries. I mean luxuries, things, items, clothing, cars, boats, houses. I mean that, but I also mean power or prestige or any of those things that can be taken away. If what you're hunting after, if what drives you in your life can be taken away from you, that's a possession. That opens the category of possession up really large. And that means that many of the things that we hunt in this world, that we try and find, aren't going to be satisfying, won't lead to personal growth, won't create belonging. They're not good for us. They won't create meaning. If we started to build a tower, but not with timbers or bricks or steel, but if we built it with ambition, if we built it with drive and persistence, then we can create something. We think that we can create opportunities, we can create empires. But I hope you all recognize that political atmospheres will shift, positions will be cut, that all the toys, all of the clothes, all of the houses, all of the boats, all of the cars, all of the things that we fill our life with that we think that are important, those things cannot bring happiness. Because if they can be taken away from you, then that's not happiness. And if you have your happiness built on something that can be taken away from you, you should pray that you do not enter into the time of trial. Right, the time of trial when you're attacked. When maybe forces of supernatural nature come into your world and start taking your things away. If you'd like an exercise, go home and read Job. Some of you understand what I'm saying when I say that. Good. Those of you who don't, go read Job. We think that we have control of our life. And we think that if we hunt after certain things that we're going to get happiness if we just acquire them. If I just had this in my life, if I just had this, if things were just a little bit like this, if I just pushed and worked and did and worked and pushed and worked and did, then I would have, and it would be good, and it would be great. And you may have those things, and you may get those things, and it may be great. And I hope that you get those things. And I pray that those things don't leave your life, because if that's where your happiness is, then the second that those things leave your life, you will ask, why, Lord, why? And those weren't the gifts that God gave you. In fact, Jesus said the exact opposite. He says, until you give up everything, you won't know anything. You cannot believe until you give up everything how truly dependent as a human being you are. How weak you are. We are so weak. And we have so many possessions that we take for granted. Things that you probably don't even think about. I got an article from Kelly that reminded me of one that I had forgotten about. For example, that when I go to bed at night, the government's not going to knock down my door and cart myself or my wife or my kids away for no reason, not tell me where they are, and not give them a trial. We have justice in our society, thanks be to God. And we just take that for granted, that if I call 911, the police officer's not going to come and steal my car while someone's stealing everything out of my house. That if I call 911, that police officer's going to come and he's going to protect me and mine from whatever bad guys out there. That if I call 911 and my garage is on fire, the fire department's not going to come and ask for a handout at that moment and take advantage of me. Oh, I'll put your garage out for $1,000. Wait, what about my taxes? Yeah, I saw that, $1,000. We take for granted that we have this beautiful system. These are our possessions. As Americans, we take that for granted. We've become accustomed to having shelter above our head, to being able to sleep at night safely, to have food in our bellies. You ever notice how often you eat simply because it's time? Yeah. When I was writing this, I was fasting. All I could think about was what time it was. As soon as that sun goes down, as soon as that sun goes down, as soon as that sun goes down, I get to eat. Christ is driving when he says to give up all of our possessions at the heart of the matter, that if you remove all of your support networks, if you remove all of your family, if you remove all of your friends, if you have nothing, then you will realize really, truly, that the only choice you have is Jesus. Because then you will realize how vulnerable you are. That all your degrees, all your connections won't matter one bit, and you will learn to pray. You will learn to see the blessings that God's given you in the small little things like a soup kitchen. Then you will understand the profound blessing of somebody who would leave on a summer's day in September on a Saturday to sweat so that you might have a house. You would recognize immediately all the little things that we take for granted. And the only way this can happen, Jesus says, is if you give everything away. Now, I mean that. Give it away. If it's taken away from you, what are you going to think? You're going to think, oh, how do I get it back? If you never had it, what are you going to think? How do I get it? But if you have it, and you give it away, then you will have true understanding. Now, here's the thing, y'all. Right now, there are thousands of pastors preaching this reading of Jesus, and they're coming up with an analogy. They're saying that Jesus' words are metaphor. I'm standing here in front of you right now, and I'm telling you, his words are not metaphor. I've been there. I've given up everything I owned. I come from a nice, rich suburb, much like Fleming Island. I had an excellent education. I had a car. I had a house. I had all the trappings of life, and I gave them up, and I went to another land where I didn't speak the language, something else that you possessed that you didn't realize you had communication, where I wasn't given shelter, where I wasn't given the expectation of justice. But I went to the church and I found some water and some food, had a roll. And I'm walking the street and I see this guy, and he's got a bandage on his foot, and it doesn't look good. You know, when the blood comes through? And he's sitting there in the dirt, and I sat with him, and I shared my water and my roll that I had with him, because I know what it is to starve. And he reaches in his bag, and he pulls out a rotten tomato. And I can smell it. You ever smell a rotten tomato? It's like overly sweet, and the skin is kind of even, it's like leathery and yellow, and the juices are just too watery. And this is what he wanted to share with me, because this is the food that he had. Because when you have nothing, that's when you share the most, because that's when you know that that's the thing that matters the most. And I'm sitting on this ground in this foreign land, and I'm watching all the people walk by. And this is a land where people don't drive a lot, so you walk. And we're in the middle of town. And I'm walking, and I'm watching the people walk, and I'm looking at them, look at me. And these are good people. That's you and me. These are good people, right? I'm just walking by me in this story. And I can see the look of detest on these people's face, like the look you give to the bottom of your shoe when you step in something. And they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them, and they're going about the world doing the things that they need to do. They're going to the store, and they're buying food for their kids, or they're going to go pick them up from school, or they're going to go here. They're just doing all the good and the normal and the regular things. And I'm looking at them, and I'm paying attention to their face, and I can see very clearly that that is the evil in the world walking by me. Because the evil in the world walking by me forgot why they were created, and they didn't know the meaning of life. And I and the guy sitting next to them were the outcasts, making their world ugly. So I spent the next year doing all that I could to make sure that people like this guy, I don't even know his name, I didn't speak the language, that people like him were given food, were given shelter, and were given justice. And I worked to start something that would continue on going. And as I understand to this day, this is, I don't know, when are we? 12 years later, that mission that I founded is still going. That those people are still getting help. That there is still an entity, us, Lutherans, that are making that happen. And that didn't happen on accident, by the way. That happened because of our offering plate. The reason I was over there was because people I don't even know back in America were sending me just a little bit of money. And where I was, $50 was enough to get me through a month. And it wasn't a lot, but it was enough to start something, and it continues to this day. What continues is that there is an understanding of God's mission in the world, and that we can be a part of it. And that as soon as we forget that, then our meanings shift, and we start working for our ends and not God's. And when we work for anything other than God, we can't be sure that what we're working for is good. And I'm standing in front of you today because there's a direct line from the me that was sitting in the dirt eating rotten tomatoes to the me that is standing in front of you here now. And it's not because I went through 10 years of post-secondary education so people could put some letters on the end of my name and put a stole on me and call me pastor. That's what the Lutherans said I needed to have. I'm standing in front of you because I'm following Jesus. Because in my walk to be perfect, I recognize that I will sin constantly. And I think it's important that someone stands up and says, I am the first sinner, follow me. So that we might go in the world and do something. And not our thing, but God's thing. Because when Jesus says the things that he says, he's not being hypothetical. He's not being metaphorical. He's being actual. He's being real. He says, look, until you give everything up, until you have nothing and you've given it all to me, only then will you know what the meaning of life is. Only then will you understand. Until it is that the very people that you love most dearly, your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, until you said to them, no, there is something even more important than you in my life, until you said Jesus is the most important thing, then there is something else. And if you can't point to the cross that you're bearing in your life, then you need somebody to stand in front of you and ring your bell. So what happens if you're not willing to sell everything? I mean, let's be honest. What happens? Right? I don't expect everybody to go sell everything they have right now. That would be unrealistic. What do you do? What do you do? Hey, Pastor, I don't want to give everything away. What do I do? Well, the first is you need to be aware. You need to listen. If the words that I'm saying are offensive to you, if you're shutting down, if you don't want to hear this, then let me ring the bell a little harder, because that's your defense mechanism to stay in your world, and you can't stay in your world. You need to be in Jesus' world. You need to be following Him and doing His bidding, not your own, not mine, not anybody else's. So you need to be aware, and you need to be careful that your cross may be shallow. That you may say to yourself, Buckman, this is the bridge that I have to bear. That's not the cross. Your God may be small. You may say, God, how come you're not helping these people? God, how come you're not giving me the things that I want in my life? No, our God is bigger. He will ask you, where are you? How come you're not serving Him? You need to be sure that your faith isn't faith in name only, that you know the mission, that you are part of the mission, and that the mission is His. It is never ours. And if you can say, yes, I am on mission, I am doing His work, then you can say maybe that you are doing the good in the world. And I can tell you that if you're doing the good in the world, you will have satisfaction, you will have personal growth, and you will find belonging. I have a life now better than I could have ever dreamed of once upon a time. And if I had tried to make this life look like this life I have now, it wouldn't. It would have failed miserably. There is something miraculous in Jesus. And I'm not just talking about resurrection. I'm talking about His Holy Spirit to get into your life and to change who you are, so that the things that you do in your world not only satisfy you, but satisfy others. That we can bear all of the goodness that God has given us, that His cross can be so immense, others will look at you and say, how can you do that? And you will say, do what? We can build empires as long as the towers that we build in those empires are His and not ours.